Okay, so hi and welcome. This is the second of 5 lunch sessions where we will be talking about evidence-based practice. Today, we are going to talk about the second step in the process called acquire. And so this means how to find your best evidence. My name is Sarah Villery. I am part of your library instruction team here at Red Rocks. I'm also a nurse practitioner with 10 years of experience in direct clinical care. So we have some in-person participants. We are also recording this on Zoom, so there may be some people watching this asynchronously later. Here is our agenda today. I am going to do a recap of what we talked about during our first session. Then we're going to dive into the second step, acquire. We'll discuss levels of evidence and the evidence hierarchy, and how to search for evidence. So translating your research question into search terms and how to come up with some searching strategies to be able to search within our databases here. And then you'll also have an opportunity to do a practice search. And then finally, we will talk about what comes next. A reminder that as Arvada students, you have full access to the Red Rocks Library. We do have a library office here at the Arvada campus. It's staffed 2 days a week, Wednesdays and Thursdays from 9 to 4. And you can also book us for one-on-one research help, either in person or virtually, by scanning this QR code or following the link at the bottom. You may have noticed that Red Rocks got a brand new website, and so did the library as part of that. And right now, this Book a Librarian form is not on the library website, so please save this QR code. It does still work, and we do still want to hear from you. So in session 1, we covered what is evidence-based practice, why is it important, and how can it be applied? So we learned that evidence-based practice means formulating a care plan based on 3 things: the best available evidence, meaning research; clinical expertise, meaning a licensed practitioner's education, experience, judgment; and patient preferences, meaning that the clinician is taking into account the patient values and beliefs and that they are equally part of this clinical decision-making process. We learned that this framework optimizes patient care, making sure that every single patient is receiving the safest and most effective care possible. And we also learned that you can really connect research and theory to your clinical practice by using the 5 A's framework of evidence-based practice. So ask, acquire, appraise, apply, and assess are the 5 steps we talked about last time. We spent the rest of the session learning about the first step, ask, how to form a good clinical question. So we talked about the 2 types of questions, background questions and foreground questions. And as a reminder, background questions seek really more general and basic information. For example, how often should women get pap smears? And foreground questions are a lot more specific to really help you inform your clinical decisions. And they are oftentimes made up of 3 to 4 components using a PICO framework. So PICO is a way to set up your questions that includes the P, either your patient, population, or problem; I, your intervention; C, your comparison; and O, your outcome. So an example of that type of question would be, in adults, what is the effect of a work-based program, exercise program, on stress reduction compared with no intervention? Any questions on what we covered last time? I know that was a really quick overview, but I just wanted to kind of go over some of the things that we're going to see in the rest of the lecture here. So, okay. So the next step in the framework is acquire, which means that you're planning, you're searching for, and you're finding the best available evidence for your question. So healthcare research is really published at a rate that's impossible for a single clinician or healthcare worker to keep up with. There is just not enough time in the day to read through every single study. But we also know the field is rapidly changing, and it is up to you to stay up to date. So how can you do that without reading every single new paper? Evidence-based practice is a way that you can summarize the best information that's out there, and it helps you really sift through the information to find the most relevant information from authoritative sources quickly. So then you can separate out what's useful for you and what's needed for your patient. So I like to think about Acquire as three kind of sub-steps. First, you're going to need to plan your search. So that means you're clarifying your question, making sure that you have your PICO format set up, or even using a different question format, but making sure that you have key concepts that you're going to be able to use to search later. You're considering what study design addresses your question type. And this is really where levels of evidence can start to come in. And then you're going to conduct your search. So in order to do this, you really need to come up with your keywords or your search terms. You need to think about which database is appropriate to answer your question. And then you can start to find the best available evidence. And you may need to broaden or narrow your search as needed. So we'll talk about different search strategies to do that. So if you're planning your search and you realize that you have a background question, we know and we learned last time that most answers for background questions are usually found in what's called secondary literature or like reference texts. So things like textbooks or practice guidelines, point of care tools, these can really save you time because the searching and the appraisal has already been done for you by experts in the field. And so they've synthesized and put together the best practice and are giving you a concise summary or a bottom line to then carry forward into your practice. So it's a really good place to start. And through the library, we have a lot of materials that can help you find evidence for your background questions. We have some print items. So for example, course textbooks or textbooks that your professors have requested that we have on hand. We have drug guides, we have medical textbooks, things like that. So you can look for those in our course catalog, or you can also come visit us at the library. We do keep some of the health sciences print texts here at the Arvada campus. And since we have a new library website, I did want to show you briefly how to find the course catalog or the library catalog. So let's see if this works. Yes. So this is the new library webpage. If you scroll all the way down to the bottom, to this library search section, the catalog where all of our print materials will be under books, and then you can search the library catalog here. So this isn't going to pull up any journal articles or search any databases. This is only going to search the print books that we have, or drug guides or medical textbooks, things like that. All right. Now, one of the downsides of print materials is that often in health sciences, they become out of date almost as soon as they're published, right? So the field is always evolving. We're getting new evidence. That means new best practice. And so a lot of times what was written even this year can be out of date as soon as it comes out. So we try to keep the latest edition, but often electronic sources can just be more up to date. So one of the databases that you have access to here that can provide some resources to help you answer background questions is called Access Medicine. So this is an online database of medical resources. It has textbooks. It has some cool tools like a differential diagnosis tool, case studies, different like flashcards and study guides for you. It has a drug database, patient education handout. So it can be really helpful. And as a student, because we subscribe to it here, you have full access to it. So I wanted to show you how this database works. And I listed out here how to get to it, just so that if you're looking at this later, you can find it on our webpage, but we'll also go through it together. So, let's see. All right. So here, oh, it opened a bunch behind. Okay, so we are back at the library webpage. Scrolling down back to that library search section. To get to our databases, you are actually going to click on articles, And then at the bottom of this section, Colorado Community College Online Library. We'll click there. And these are all of the databases that we subscribe to here at Red Rocks. So to find Access Medicine, it's going to be in the A section, which is right here at the top, but you can always browse alphabetically. So this will limit it just to our A databases. And here is Access Medicine. And it's loading slowly. Let's see. Okay. So this is the keyword search right here in the middle. So if we wanted to look, for example, our question of how often should women get pap smears? If we wanted to look for that, we can type in pap smear here. It's going so slow. Okay. And so you see it has 327 results for that. I like to use the filters here on the left. So if I'm looking for just a quick guideline, this is really a quick reference question. I can limit it by quick reference resources. And if I click on one of these, it's actually going to take me directly to that section in this book. So you'll see it'll kind of scroll through and take me right to the section on the pap smear guidelines. You can always scroll back up to the top to download the entire chapter. If you click this, it'll give you a citation, which, you know, I would take these with a grain of salt because a lot of times they do tend to have errors in them, but it can give you like a starting point to cite the reference here. This may also be something that instead of like a quick reference or like a chapter book, I may find a table with it. So I could limit it by table. And, you know, this cancer screening table looks like it may be helpful. So under cervical cancer, here are, you know, the screening guidelines, and it tells us this is a level grade A evidence, which is the highest level. So I could always save or print this table, but it's all right here for me in Access Medicine. One other thing I wanted to show here is they also have patient education handouts, which can be really helpful. A lot of times, depending on where you end up working, they have their own patient education handouts for you, either through like Epic or their EHR system that they use, or they may just have them at your clinic. I always found these really helpful anyways, because I like to read through before going in to talk with the patient. I like to read through to see the language that they use to educate patients about these topics so that I could really avoid some of the medical jargon. And it would also give me like the key points that I should hit on when I'm counseling this patient. So I always like to have access to these and read through some. These are some that are vetted and put together for you already. They include the references here so that you can go directly to the source. They also have some nice graphics that you can use and save. So I really like the patient education handouts here. If you were looking to get to some of the other resources that we talked about, you can see up at the top bar here, they have different cases that you can look through, different videos that you can watch, study tools like flashcards, things like that. So this is a really handy website to help find the answer to a lot of those background questions. Oh, any questions on Access Medicine? No, okay. So what if instead you have a more complex question, like a foreground question where you've actually, you have multiple concepts that you're trying to search for? So there's two really broad types of resources available. filtered resources, and unfiltered. So filtered resources means that experts have posed a question, they've evaluated all of the studies available, and they've put together best practice recommendations for you. Some caveats to this: not all topics are covered, right? They haven't asked every single question out there, and they may not be entirely up to date. So if there are filtered resources available, this would be like a systematic review or a clinical guideline. You could find it in a lot of like point of care tools. Then that's great. It's a great starting point. And it's also one of the highest levels of research that's out there, because these are already appraised research studies and appraised evidence. But if they don't have it on your topic, then you will go into what's called unfiltered resources. And this is the primary research. So this is someone's original research. It is up to you to really assess the quality and validity of those research studies. But a lot of times these unfiltered resources can be your best option to find really specific information. So this would be through research databases like Nursing and Allied Health Premium, PubMed, CINAHL, Google Scholar. So before we get into how to find research through unfiltered resources, I did want to talk briefly about levels of evidence. So this is what's called the evidence pyramid. It's one way that you can model the levels of evidence, meaning that not all research study designs are created equal. So this is a visual representation of how we can evaluate and really rank the authority of different research methods. So the higher you get to the top, the fewer studies there are available, but the more rigorous those studies are and the less risk of bias they have. A lot of times we hear that randomized controlled trials are the gold standard and the top of the pyramid, and they are for that unfiltered information section. But not every question is appropriately answered by randomized controlled trials. So this is a tool to help you. This is not the end all be all, because you really need to combine this with your clinical judgment. Some study designs are going to be more appropriate to answer your particular research question. So like, for example, if you have a question, does exposure to a specific cancer-causing chemical cause cervical cancer in women? You can't expose women knowingly to a cancer-causing chemical. That is not ethical, right? So you can't really have a randomized control trial to answer that question. You would need to go to other types of study designs. And so depending on the type of question you're asking, you're going to look for different types of studies. So if you recall, last time we talked about within and using the PICLO template, there are different question types. So looking at these same question types, there are different types of evidence that are more ideal to answer those question types. So for example, if you have a prognosis type question, it's not likely that you will find randomized control trials for that. And in fact, a cohort study would better answer your prognosis question. So this is just something to keep in mind as you're looking at the evidence. A lot of times people can filter by randomized controlled trials only or discount some other study designs, and I would encourage you not to do that. Okay, so getting into our search strategies, the first thing that I want to talk about are synonyms. So synonyms are different terms that can have the same meaning, and this is especially common in healthcare. So for example, the term healthcare provider, when talking about in the literature, can also be healthcare with a space between it. It could be written as healthcare professional, as health personnel, as healthcare worker, and these may all mean the same things, but different authors may choose to use one of these terms in their study. And the computer and the databases is extremely literal. So it's not going to recognize synonyms, or if you ask it to find healthcare provider, it's not automatically going to pull health personnel articles too. So you can miss out on a lot of relevant literature if you don't include some of these other terms, if you're doing a free text search, meaning you're typing in your search terms. So definitely think about what other ways can this term be called in the literature or in the research? The second thing is how to broaden or narrow your search. So there's a couple different strategies. The first one is quotation marks. So if you put quotes around a phrase, then it's going to tell the database to look for those words in that exact order, and they have to be together. So community college with quotations around it is going to pull articles with community college phrase listed. If I didn't have those quotations, then community and college would just have to be listed anywhere in the article, but not necessarily together. So you would get a lot more articles retrieved from your search, but they wouldn't be as relevant. You would probably get a lot of things that were not what you were looking for, right? So that's one way to really narrow your search to more relevant articles. Truncation is where you add an asterisk to stand in for different letters. So this is a good way to help pull different variations of a word without having to write them all out. So if I searched for NURS with the truncation asterisk, then it's going to find results with the word nurse, nurses, nursing. So that can be really helpful because you don't have to write out all of those searches. The database will do that for you. One thing to keep in mind is that you need to be really careful with this. So if you can pull things that are not what you're looking for, like for example, if I were trying to truncate the word hospital and I did HOSP asterisk, then I would get hospital, I would get hospitalization, I would get other things like hospitality or hospice, right? So when you're using the asterisk, try and think of all the different variations that may come up. And it may be that you want to add a couple extra letters to it so that the computer is only looking for what you're asking it to look for. I like to use the asterisk to add in plurals of a word, because a lot of times articles can be written like nurse or nurses. So I'll use the asterisk for that a lot of times. And then last, we have Boolean operators. And or not. So these are connector terms. So the computer and database knows which words are related to each other and how they're related. So for example, if you were doing a search for apples and you asked it to look for apple and green, then all those articles about apples and all those articles about green, the computer will only pull ones that have both of those terms together. So you're going to get a much smaller result pool, but it's going to be a lot more relevant to you. Or if you were looking for apple, or you didn't mind if the article used the scientific name for it, then you may ask it to look for apple or Malus pumila. And so the computer will bring back articles that have one or the other. And then finally, not is a way to exclude words from your search. So if you were looking for Apple, the company, instead of Apple, the food, then maybe you would tell the computer to search for Apple, not fruit. So any article that has the word fruit in it is not included in your search. Okay, so putting this all together, how can we actually translate your PICO question into search terms? And so we are going to do this by writing it out, right? Keep a copy of what you're doing either on your computer or on a paper, but you'll start with each of your individual concepts, and you're going to try and think of all of the synonyms that may be relevant for that concept. And you are going to connect those terms using the Boolean operator or. So for your P concept, you may have 1 plus whatever synonyms you have. And you can, I gave 3 here, 3 lines, but you can have as many synonyms as you want. And then between your PICO concepts, you're going to combine those with the Boolean operator and. So what that actually looks like is we're going to go through a case study to actually practice this. So if I had the research question, in older adults, does animal-assisted therapy reduce symptoms of depression? So the first step is going to be identifying my PICO elements from this question. So My P would be older adults. My I is animal-assisted therapy. My C is no animal-assisted therapy, or maybe just standard of care or best practice, or just, treatment as usual. And my O is symptoms of depression. I wanted to also point out that I didn't include the word reduce for my O, for reduced symptoms of depression, because when you're doing a search, you really don't want to include verbs or qualifiers for a couple reasons. One, there's a lot of different ways to talk about that, right? So reduce could be decrease, it could be minimize, it could be lessen. And so if you include a really specific qualifier like reduce, then you're missing out on a lot of other ones that are still talking about the exact same thing. But also there may be relevant articles that talk about how animal-assisted therapy maybe increases symptoms of depression or worsens symptoms of depression. And that's still relevant to our question. Like, we would still want to know that. And so we want to be able to find that research too. So focusing only on the nouns for your PICO concepts helps avoid that. We can think about what type of question this is. So this is an intervention question. And if we were to refer to the table I showed you earlier for intervention questions, the ideal type of evidence for this, at the top of our pyramid would be our filtered resources like systematic reviews. If those are not available, then the next highest level would be a randomized control trial. But also cohort study and case control studies would give us really good evidence for this research question as well. So to write out my search, we'll start with the P element. And if you recall, that was older adults. So since this is a phrase, I'm going to put it in quotations, and then I'm going to use that truncation asterisk to include things, articles that have older adult or older adults. So that takes care of both of those. And then I start thinking of some other synonyms that may be used in the literature to describe an older adult. So ones that I came up with were elderly or aged. There may be other ones. Can you all think of any other synonyms for older adult? Senior citizen, yeah, or just senior. Geriatric, or retired sometimes, or like some articles will even list it out like over 55. So those are all things that we can include. And say we start doing our research and we're not getting enough results, we may want to add some more terms in, right? For now, we'll just start with this, but yeah, there's a lot of other terms for older adults that we could choose to include in our search. So then we'll move on to I, animal-assisted therapy. Again, this is a phrase, so I'm going to put it in quotations. A lot of times, if there is a hyphen in a word, it's a good idea to include it without the hyphen as well, because some people may leave it out when they're writing it. So I'm going to also do animal-assisted therapy without. I've also seen it written as pet therapy, so we'll put that in there. But also, if you wanted to look specifically at like dog therapy, specifically, then you would want to include that here, but we'll start really broad for ours. And then with the C, because it is just a standard of care, we don't actually need to list anything out for that. So we can just skip the C for this example, and we'll go to the O, which was symptoms of depression, or I'm going to call it depression symptoms. And I've put this in a quote, and then I did use truncation because I wanted to capture depression. That also will capture depressive, and then symptom, singular, and symptoms, plural. So the database will search for all of those combinations for me. Depression just on its own, major depressive disorder on its own. So those were the ones that I came up with, but there may be other ones too. I wanted to pause and say, we kind of talked about this before, but please write down your search terms. This is going to be the longest part of your search, is trying to come up with what your search terms are and the synonyms. And so if you walk away from your search, maybe you go have dinner or take a phone call, you come back and your computer's kicked you out or rebooted you, and then you lose all of your search terms. It's nice to have it somewhere so that you can just pull it quickly. But also with research, reproducibility and being able to have other people replicate your research is really important. So when it comes time to actually share your research with others, they need to be able to go back and see how you found what you found. And so a lot of times actually putting in your search terms in, if you write an article or do a presentation, is expected. So making sure that you list that out so that you know how you found the articles that you found. Sometimes people prefer to list this instead of like textually, like how we did it on the last slide. Sometimes people like to have almost like a search matrix and more of a table. And so you, as you move down the rows, you would add an and between those. And as you move across, you would add an or across each of those concepts. So whichever one works, whichever way visually works for you, you know, they both are saying the same thing. So once you have your search strategy, then you can think about which database to actually put your search into. For this, you wouldn't necessarily search like an art history database, right? You want to find a database that has journals looking at research from the field that you're posing a question in. So we do have a lot of health sciences research databases through the library. The one that I'm going to talk about today is called Nursing and Allied Health Premium, but this search could also be done through PubMed. It could be done through CINAHL, the nursing database. So Nursing and Allied Health Premium is a research database that provides research and scholarly literature, but it's also combined with clinical training videos to give you like a really multimedia coverage is what they call it. So this is available online. There's not an app for this, but you do have access to it through the library webpage, and we subscribe to it. So we can go there. It keeps opening behind the screen, which is okay. So here is the library homepage. We're going to scroll all the way down back to the library search section. Under articles, we're going to go to the Colorado Community College Online Library. And this time we're going to click on the N and scroll down to Nursing and Allied Health Premium. Okay, so the search database is this top half here. If you were looking for some of the skills videos, that's going to be in this bottom half here, but we're going to focus on the search database. So since we have multiple components, I'm going to go to the advanced search section, and this actually includes the Boolean operators for you here, and it makes it really easy because you can put your P search terms on the top line, your I, your C, and you could add a row if you needed to. The other thing I wanted to show you that's really cool about this database is they have a thesaurus built in here. So if you're trying to come up with synonyms for older adults, for example, or your other search terms, you can search in their thesaurus, and it will actually tell you some other terms that are used in the literature that are some broader terms, some more narrow terms underneath it that you may want to include in your search. But okay, so let me go. I am going to copy and paste our search terms that we just came up with here. And we'll see what we find. So 681 results, which is pretty good. Remember, we did really narrow our search by including this operator and, because every article has to be relevant to these 4 concepts, right? So 681 is a pretty good amount, I think. We can always use some of these filters here, like if we wanted it to be peer-reviewed literature only, or we weren't interested in like dissertations, we wanted to just look in scholarly journals, we could limit that by when this was posted. But once we do find an article that we like let's say, for example, that this first one looks really good, we can read the abstract here, and this gives you an idea of what the article is talking about. It usually talks about the methods that they used, the discussion. Let's say this is what we like. We can download it. We can view the full text here. They also have a citation button here to give you a starting point for putting together your citation, and you can choose which format you want it to be cited in. Any questions on nursing and allied health premium? Okay. All right. So we are going to break and do an activity where you are all going to get to practice doing this. So you should have an activity sheet, and I will post this in the Zoom chat as well. If you're watching this asynchronously, you can just pause here and go through the activity by yourself, and then we'll all come together and actually go through it together in about 5 minutes. But I've given you a research question here at the top. So what I want you to do with your partner is first define what your PICO elements are, and then come up with your search strategy. So decide what terms you want to use, if any of those are going to have quotations, if you want to include any asterisks or truncations in it. And then I want you to find the Nursing and Allied Health Premium database from the library website. So if you can start on the library homepage, access that database, and then run your search, and we can see what you found and what you came up with. All right, so some of the things I came up with for my PICO elements based on this research question. So I listed pregnant women, right, as my P, daily home blood pressure monitoring as my I. For the comparison, it's just to the standard of care. So we really don't need to include that in our search. And O, I listed risk of preeclampsia. So if we look at our P element, pregnant women, I put that in quotation marks, right? Because that's a phrase. I also included pregnant woman just in case to have the singular. I included pregnant with the truncation asterisk to cover pregnant, but also would cover pregnancy, pregnancies. I came up with perinatal, which you can see with the hyphen or without the hyphen as one word. Maternal. We talked about expecting a little bit during our discussion, or like gestational. So there's other terms that we could include. These are just some examples. Then we're going to connect it with and. For home blood pressure monitor, I put that in quotes, right? And then I actually did a truncation at the end of monitor because it could be monitors, it could be monitoring. So there's just different endings and variations of that word. I also did self-monitor blood pressure, which we can see without the hyphen or with the hyphen. And again, I did the asterisk on monitor. I've also seen it listed as SMBP. So I included that as well. I left the C out because we really don't need to include standard of care for our search. And for the O, I just did preeclampsia, and we can see that without the hyphen as one word or with the hyphen. So we can search the database. So we'll scroll down to library search. We'll go to articles. Colorado Community College Online Library. We're going to go to N for nursing. And here it is. One thing I do want to mention too, every database is a little bit different for how they run their searches. So some databases will actually pull synonyms or plurals for you, or pull words that are similar, or if you have perinatal, right? One word with the hyphen, some databases will recognize that those are the same words. But the benefit of writing out all of these options is that not every database does that. Unless you're really familiar with how the database is doing the search, you don't really know if it's going to do that. And we can now copy and paste this search into multiple different databases, right? So it kind of covers every database's search strategies. So just a little aside there. Okay, so I'm going to copy and paste my search terms here. And we got 106 results. And kind of just scrolling through, here's the systematic review, which we know is one of those filtered resources and one of the highest levels of evidence that we could find. So that would be a great option. We can click on the abstract here to just make sure that this is what we're looking for. To access it, you can either just view the PDF here, or you can download the PDF here. But this looks like it would answer our question. We'd have to read through a little bit more, but any questions about the activity? Or anything else you wanted to look at on nursing and allied health premium? Okay. Okay. So that covers finding your evidence. If you have more questions, please let us know, come find us, book a librarian if you're still having trouble finding things for your search, or need a little help coming up with search terms, anything like that, let us know. But our next session is going to be on the third step in the framework, appraise. So this is learning how to actually understand the results that you found. So now you've come up with your clinical question, you found multiple articles that hopefully answer your clinical question, but now looking at the articles, how do you decide if it's applicable? How do you decide if these are really good articles that are evidence-based and authoritative and that are valid and don't have bias? So we'll talk about that. And it should be in February. The specific date is TBD, but we will keep you posted on that. And then after that, in the spring, we're going to have 2 other sessions to talk about apply and assess, the last 2 steps in the evidence-based practice framework. I did add to the LibGuide, or the research guide that we had talked about last time. So this is an online kind of file of resources for you on the topic. So we have a page on just general evidence-based practice from last time. We have a page on the first step in the framework ask. Now we have a page on acquire. So this is going to cover additional resources on what we talked about today. So if you still have questions, there's tutorials, there's some web pages that are really helpful for you. So you can find that either by using the QR code or going to the link here. And here's my contact information if you do want to get in touch. And we would love your feedback. So this will help us make each session even better. So either you can fill out the paper form here if you're in person, or you can go to this Microsoft Forms using the QR code or using the link, and we would really appreciate it. Thank you.